All right, welcome back, students. We are moving on to the second to last step in the cutting board project. At this point, you should have a relatively smooth board surface on both sides after the planer. You should have your hole drilled on the drill press. And then the next step is to cut your rounded corners on the bandsaw. So in order to get those measurements, you have two options. We have some compasses here, or protractors that you can use to trace a radius of your choice onto each corner, and then you can cut those out on the bandsaw. Or another option that we have these little metal pucks that we have a couple of them here in the shop. You can use these. They're about a 3-inch radius. They work pretty well. You can place them right on your board, just like this, kind of line them up so that rounded part is just touching on each side, and then you can trace around that radius to get the radius that you'll cut out on your cutting board. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to go ahead and set this on here, and I'm going to trace that radius following the edge of this puck, going right around this corner. So I don't know if you can see it. Oh, you can see a little bit. So right there, I've got my lines traced. Try and line up your edges so that they're kind of eased into the sides on both edges here. And then we're going to go ahead and use this bandsaw to make our cut. So a couple things you need to know about the bandsaw. When you are making your cuts, make sure that you're going to want to start out with, one edge of your board almost parallel to the blade. You're going to ease into that cut, and then as you make your cut, you're just going to slowly rotate that blade, rotate the board around the blade as you go. Remember, you don't want to put a lot of pressure when using the bandsaw. Let the blade do all the work. It's very sharp. Just very gentle pressure and rotate as you go. And if it's too tight of a radius for the blade that you're using, and it's starting to put pressure or bind as you go, you can always just go straight out your cut and then jump back in right where you left off to continue that curve. Okay, you don't ever want to try and twist it so much that you're putting pressure on the blade, twisting the blade, or adding too much sideways or forward and backward pressure. So because the bandsaw can get a little loud and screechy at times, I'm going to go ahead and put in my earplugs, and I am going to make my cut on this corner. So I'm going to start it up, line up my piece. Okay, so like you can see here, it was starting to put a little bit of pressure on right about there. So I just went straight out the end. And now I'm going to jump back in right about here to continue making that curved cut. And as always, you want to wait until the machine stops before you walk away. In this case, we have a nice little brake pedal down here that you can stop it with. So if you look there, we've got a rounded corner cut. It's not perfect. There's a couple little ridges, which is where the sanders will come in handy. I could walk right over here to the spindle sander, which is right here. I'm going to go ahead and turn that on and round over my edges. So I'm just going to very gently place it up against that spindle. Slowly walk it around until I've got any ridges smoothed out. This does a great job with those curves. Trying to get that one little ridge kind of evened out here. That's pretty good. A little bit more there. Shut that down. Okay, so now I've got a nice smooth edge, and you'll want to repeat that for all 4 corners. Get them all nice and smooth, and then you're ready to move on to the next step after that, which is going to the router table. Router table, this is our final step before the final sanding on our cutting board project. So this machine is designed to do all sorts of different profiles on the edges of your boards. In this case, I am going to use a 1/4" roundover bit just to give myself a slight roundover on all edges and corners of my board. You can also round over and smooth out the inside of the hole that you've drilled. So to use this machine, you always want to make sure that you are going against the cutting blade of the router. So in this case, our cutting blade turns counterclockwise, which means when you're standing in front of it, you want to make sure you're moving your board from right to left. So this type of router bit has a guide wheel. There's a little bearing wheel where as you make a cut, you're going to keep your board nice and tight on that bearing wheel. That's essentially your guide. And then you'll keep it nice and snug, work your way along that blade going against the cutter head from right to left. And you can work your way around all 4 sides, flip it over, and repeat on the other 4 sides. This is going to give you just a nice little round over, nice smooth edge. We also recommend using push blocks when you're working with a smaller board. You can hold down firmly with those, and it helps to keep your hands and fingers away from the blade of that cutter head. So I'm going to go ahead and ease into this and show you how it works. Start button right over here. You have to lift up a little metal bar, turn it on, then slowly drop the bar back down, and as soon as you're ready to stop it, you just hit the bar and it will shut the machine off. Okay, here we go. Now, I went around one whole side here. If you kind of look at it, you can kind of see there is now a slight radius on these edges here and here. Just kind of cleans it up, makes it look nice, gives you a little rounded edge. I also went right around this curve, gave myself a radius corner there. I would also flip this over. I would do the other side as well. Once you're ready to do the hole, you want to make sure that the router is shut off and place this directly over the hole with the bit centered, because when you start the machine, you don't want it to be touching the wood. So I'm going to go ahead and line that up. I'm going to start this up, and then I'm going to work my way around the inside edges of that hole. I've got that cut done. I'm going to wait for that blade to stop. Then I'm going to go ahead and reach in. And now I have a nice kind of round over on the inside of my hole. It makes it look really nice and smooths it out. This is the final step of our cutting board project, aside from doing all your finished sanding. So to complete the project, we're going to go over to our downdraft table with our Orbiter sanders, and I will show you how to do all of your final sanding. Final step of our cutting board project. So at this point, you should have a board that is, fairly smooth on both sides from the planer. You should have your hole drilled, your corners rounded, and your router table kind of edges smoothed out. So this board, obviously, I'm not quite there, but for our examples here, I'm going to show you the final step of sanding. So the easiest way to sand this board to get it nice and smooth is going to be using our orbital palm sanders. So these, essentially, the discs rotate around and vibrate in kind of a random pattern. As you're sanding, you want to move your sander in a circular motion. We have different grits of sandpaper that you can use for this. When you're working on a cutting board where you're trying to get a surface that's nice and smooth, you always want to start with a coarse grit sandpaper first, which means a low number. So for example, you're going to want to start with a 40 or 60 grit. You'll see typically on the back side of the sandpaper, it will have a number. This is a 40 grit. So I'm going to start here. The bottom pads of our sanders are Velcro. These will just Velcro right on. You want to try and kind of line up the holes as best you can. Stick that on there, and then those will Velcro onto the sander. There's an on switch right here that you push, and then you're just going to kind of hold it with one hand while you sand. One other thing I want to mention is making sure that anytime you're doing sanding over here at the downdraft tables, always turn on the machine. I'm not going to turn it on now because it's really loud and you won't be able to hear me, but make sure you turn that on when you're doing any sanding. That helps to kind of pull the dust down into the machine and keep it out of the air that we're breathing. So just like that, we're going to do some sanding. Once you've done a pass with the coarser grit sandpaper and gotten all of the major kind of lines from the planer or imperfections out, you're going to move up to a slightly finer grit. The next step I would recommend going to somewhere in the 1 to 200 range grit sandpaper. You're going to apply one of those to the sander, sand that. Sometimes take your time, make sure you've got it nice and smooth between each pass. And then finally you're going to finish with a fine grit sandpaper, somewhere between a 2 to 300 grit. With that final pass of your fine grit sandpaper, your board should be feeling baby smooth. It's going to be very soft to the touch. Shouldn't be any imperfections. You want to keep sanding until you've got any and all imperfections or lines out, because once you oil your board, it's going to expose any imperfection that may be left. So after you've done your sanding, everything is nice and smooth, your board's looking really nice. Your final step is going to be applying a mineral oil that is food grade. We have this here in the shop. The oil is located above the sinks in kind of an opaque or white gallon-sized bottle. You're going to pour a small amount on the board. Remember, a little bit goes a long ways. Grab some paper towels and start spreading it all over the surface of your board on all sides. And then you will place your board in the locker to dry. Make sure you clean up after yourself. And the next class period, your board should be dry enough that it will be ready for grading, and then you can take it home.